So welcome everyone to Cerulean Arts Tour and Talk for the exhibition Around the Neighborhood, featuring the work of Tracy Everly, Elizabeth Heller, and James Toogood. The exhibition is up through May 21st. I hope you can come down and see it in person. Everything is also available on our website, so you can see things there. So I'm going to spotlight Tina's video, and we're going to tour the exhibition, and I'm going to call upon each artist to speak a little bit about themselves, their work, and who would like to go first. Any takers? Tracy, Liz, or James?
Well,
any volunteers?
A friend of mine was going to dial in from Texas, Annette DeFerrari, and she called to make sure she could join it and everything. So I'd rather wait just to see if she can join in. She might have just had a couple minutes of being late because she had a class.
But I could start if you'd like, Mike. Sure. I'll start. So the pieces that I have on display are images of Philadelphia and New York City. The one we're looking at right now is New York City. And I had spent a fair amount of time in New York a little while back. I was teaching at the National Academy of Design when it was on Fifth Avenue. And this was a scene that was on 50th Street looking west, right at Broadway. But the painting, as you see it, really is not what I saw. There are lots and lots of liberties that are being taken place. And so the drawing is done, like all my drawings, the cityscape drawings, with legitimate construction. And I'm basically using the principles of geometry to plot out the drawing as much as from observation. In fact, the building we're looking at right now was partially constructed with me making a model so that I could do some alterations to the building and I would have a sense of what it would look like. And that's typical to the kind of work that I do. This is a watercolor on paper. It is 22 by 30. And it was done on a piece of 300-pound Arches cold press paper. And this is about as large as I typically work. What some people call a full sheet, but what really is it's called an imperial size piece of paper. The other pieces in the show are a little smaller.
I should say, if people have questions, they can
yeah, if anybody has a question, I'd be happy to answer anything.
Yeah, as we go, you don't have to wait to the end.
Here's another one of my paintings, and this is Two Penn Center. That I'm fascinated with seeing the architecture in the city, and this is part of a series. We'll see another painting from that same series that the compositions are very frontal, and then there's a lot of reflection that's going on. You see inside the building, you see the reflections of Love Park across the street, and I'm fascinated with all these different textures. I also was drawn to this building because the glass was unusually distorting the images in the reflection, and I found that to be a lot of fun to paint. This is a quarter sheet, so it's a quarter of the size of the painting we were just looking at. There are two more that are that size. This painting here, it's called West Entrance, and basically it is the west entrance of Comcast One. And a lot of times with paintings like this, I will have a certain degree of ambiguity, especially within the title, because there's so much specificity in the image itself, you're seeing inside the building, really inside the building, all the way across to Suburban Station. You're seeing some of the sculptural figures that are in the lobby. You're seeing reflections of the buildings that are behind us. All these things are going on, and this is one of those things that actually takes quite a long time. In fact, all three paintings that we've looked at so far are very time consuming. The New York painting took about 400 hours. This took quite a number of hours, but I kind of lost track of how many it was, just because there were so many compound images that I had to take into consideration. This is about a half of a sheet vertically. Does anybody have any questions?
So James, are you taking photographs of these scenes?
Yeah. So the two that we're looking at right now, I just took photographs with my phone, and then have them printed up and go from there. Some of the stuff, especially the work that I do in Bermuda, is based on plein air studies, but the stuff that I'm doing in Philadelphia and New York especially is using photo references for the most part. And there are good practical reasons. I once had a woman in the Italian market come after me with a meat cleaver when I was trying to do some plein air work in the market. And I thought, perhaps I should find a different way to get in and get out more quickly.
What did she think you were doing?
She just didn't want me there.
Mhm. All right, so maybe Tracy will let you have a go at it.
Sure. Thank you. So I'm Tracy, and I've been painting for, I think, about 30 years now. I primarily paint in oils, and I was born in Philadelphia, raised in Philadelphia, and then moved to the suburbs in Bucks County, which is where I live now. So I spent probably the first 25 years painting exclusively from life and direct observation. And but then I switched and started painting from photos. But I think all the years of experience painting from life just informed the way that I work with photos. So these paintings in the show are all 6 by 6 inches, and they were really born from play and exploration. I was finding myself in sort of a bit of a blocked state creatively. I was overworking things and just sort of trying too hard. And so to sort of work my way out of that, I started working on paper, just because it helped me feel a little bit less precious about what I was doing, and allowed me to loosen up and have a little more fun. And and the other benefit of working on paper for me is that I was able to draw right on the paper before I started the oil paintings. I mean, you can do that anyway, but I love the feeling of drawing on paper. So this was like a really cool, fun way for me to combine the two. So yeah.
So Tracy, are you working outside with these?
So these are all done from photos. Yep, these are all done from photos. This is one from Philadelphia. And so, part of the reason I paint, or maybe the main reason I paint, is that I sort of paint to see and to experience things. I think of it as like, it's my way of being in the world. I explore things through drawing, and so whether I'm working from photos, whether I'm working from life, whether I'm painting landscapes or buildings or still lives or people, it's sort of all the same process. Although I work in different ways, so I don't always work in the same way, but I suppose my approach is the same. So I do see a question. Can I just jump in and look at that? Let's see. Do I make changes to the colors? Is that for me? That question? Or might that be?
Yes, same question for you and James, actually.
Okay.
Knowing,
Oh, I see.
yes.
Sorry, well, James, why don't you go first?
Okay. Yes, I'm making constant changes. One of the things that I'm fond of saying is I want the painting to tell me what it needs. And so you're looking at the painting and scrutinizing the painting as you're going through. And one of the other things that I frequently do is look at the painting in a mirror that I have adjacent to my painting table, so I can quickly see the painting in reflection. And it kind of, for me, the act of painting is almost like self-hypnosis. So I find that if I can quickly look at the painting in the mirror, I might be able to see some nascent patterns that are happening if I'm painting Venice and I'm painting the ripples in the water, or trees and patterns or things like that. And so that's just part of what I'm doing throughout the whole process. I find it's a way of making sure that I've got everything in place the way I want it to be. So changes are being made, not wholesale changes, although the one that you saw before previously of New York, a lot of pretty broad liberties were being taken. But with some of these buildings, these are scenes that people might recognize in Philadelphia. So I want to stay faithful to the essence of the buildings, but I want to also be able to, put my own stamp imprimatur on there. So it's a little bit of both. It's today when I was working in the studio, I was taking all kinds of liberties. I'm not looking at anything except the painting and just, responding to the needs of the painting.
How about you, Tracy?
So I don't typically edit the reference photo. So if I'm working from a photo, I'm working with it just as it was. But I do a lot of editing as I paint. My thought is always that I want to include sort of as little the least amount of information that I need. But usually what that means for me is I first include too much information, and then I edit out what isn't needed. So when it's all said and done, what's left, everything that's left serves some kind of compositional purpose. But these, again, so these paintings, I may not have said this, these were alla prima, which means they were done all in one shot. So I didn't return to them. I sort of made it a point for these not to return to them. So, but even so, as I was working from the photos, I'm not going through sort of including a laundry list of everything that I see. I am, including only what I think is needed to make the painting work.
All right, thank you. So Liz, we'll let you speak your piece. Oh, you're muted.
I'm now unmuted. Okay, well, I've lived in Philadelphia since 1975. Before that, my family moved a number of times around the country. And so when I made my home in Manayunk, it became my dear home. I've lived in my house for 35 years. And so most of the paintings in the show are within a couple miles of my house. And I was a union carpenter for 9 years and then an independent contractor for 26 years. And I tried to do my art on nights and weekends. And I finally went to community college and then the academy to learn more. And I graduated in 2008 from the academy. And for the last 7 or 8 years, I've been able to work on my art full time, which has been wonderful. And so for me, one of the hardest things about painting is actually deciding on a subject. I will wander around a lot, and I walk around a lot in Manayunk, and sometimes I'll think I see something that's mysterious. And then if I try to work on it, it quickly becomes less mysterious and very difficult. So each one of these paintings was, that process happened before I sat down to try to really paint it. The first one, which is called, not this one, but the one before that, of the one of the land after the flood of 2021. Could we go back to that one, or to the first painting? That one, yeah. As you probably know, we had a terrible flood in Manayunk in September of 2021, and the river rose and met the canal. So on the left is the canal, and out of sight on the right is the Schuylkill River. So mud came over the whole land that I had been used to seeing as just a dry land with grass. And it beat the grass down, and then I just found it visually beautiful. And I also, the emotion of it appealed to me. And this is trucks who came to fix everything. They left these beautiful patterns in the dirt, and it changed every day. So one day it seemed particularly beautiful, and I drew it that day, but it actually was different every day. And the tree in the middle is a Polonia tree, which is also called an empress tree, and it's the same as the ones on the Logan Circle. It seemed like a stained glass window to me with the small fractured bits of light, just like a noble thing to survive the flood and be so beautiful, you know, in the face of this really messy environment. So anyway, I love it down there, and I walk around there pretty often. So that's all with that painting. And the next painting is from a vision I saw of this gate that is messed up and doesn't work anymore. As a matter of fact, the building to the left has been sold, but the really beautiful curly wires and sort of the combination of light and shadow to me was really beautiful. The shadows of these basically weed bushes, and then this strange circular thing, which, you know, just has such a graphic beauty to me. And then the clouds, which in Manayunk seem to repeat themselves, they follow the hills. So like one day the clouds will be a certain way, and then if you keep looking in another week, they might actually sort of come back. I don't know why that happens, but from observing it, it seems to me to happen. And then every fall, this bunch of trees turns bright orange. And I always hope that I'm going to capture it. And it's not quite what I saw, but it's closer than the last time. So that's it. Does anybody have any questions?
So Liz, you're also a sculptor.
Yes, I am. Although in recent years, I've had more time to paint because it's harder to get models, you know.
So how do the two things feed each other for you?
Well, one thing I wanted to say, and especially when James was talking about geometry, is that for me, the inspiration for my work comes from what I would call like an emotional geometry. So things have a meaning because of how they're put together. And it's grand. Space and perspective and measuring to me are a grand statement about both the way the world is and the way that the world feels visually. And when you're working from the human form, which I do in my sculpture, and I add wood and metal to it sometimes, it's the same kind of thing of attempting to isolate this geometry, which speaks about beauty, proportion, one thing to the next. And all of us have an innate sense of proportion that's very accurate. So if you see a drawing of a human being, you'll immediately pick up on the fact, like if the head is too big, or even if that person has a big head, there's a limit to, how much out of proportion people actually occur. And I've measured it and studied it. So I know that, 1 to 6.5 heads, for example, is a very big head for a person, and 6.5 to the whole figure. And 8 is almost unheard of, but some people will be like 7.25, 7.5 is normal. And you can see that. And I find that moving, that a person is so precious, exactly that person. And it's the same way with the landscape. There is no other place like Manioc, there's nothing as beautiful as that to me. I feel very happy to live there. Sort of like, to me, it seems like a kind of paradise. So that's how my sculpture fits with my painting. It's about proportion and geometry and emotional expression. And because it's hard to get models and pay for models for long times, my sculpture has developed less since I graduated from the academy. And I'm really hoping that as time goes on, I can arrange and pay for more models, and get more sculptural growth, So.
And you're working primarily from observation, yes?
Every painting in the show, except for one, is entirely from observation. And the reason is winter came and I just really didn't want to lose the painting. So I was with help. I made a photo collage and I worked from that for another 85 hours, but I spent 80 hours outside on it first. But I found that it is not me. I'd rather not do that again. So I just don't see as much from photographs, Some people do. Some people see more, but I don't. So I want to go outside more.
So James, you went to the academy, and were you doing watercolor there?
Yeah, one of the things that happened is, of course, in the certificate program, there were very structured things. So you had oil painting class with Arthur DaCosta, and you had drawing with Roz Widener, and you had different kinds of things like that. But then once you got into the open studio, even if the instructor, for example, was Arthur DaCosta, there was no requirement that you had to work in oil. And so what I decided to do was take the information he was talking about with regard to paint and pigments and so on, and I would try and translate that into watercolor. Of course, Arthur got very angry at me for a few weeks until we had a meeting and I talked about what it was that I was trying to do. After that, anything that came across his desk that had to do with watercolor came directly to, as he put it, Toogood. So it worked out fine. And that's basically the beginning of my journey about thinking about paint and pigments and the science and the chemistry that go into making a painting, understanding all the different components. The piece we're looking at right now, this is actually a serigraph. It is a 37 screen print that was done on Reeves BFK. And it took about a year working with another artist to put the whole thing together. It was a very labor-intensive project, as actually all my projects are. So that's what we're looking at here. The painting that the serigraph was based on was purchased by the Woodmere Art Museum. And so from time to time, they'll have that piece on display. But I think after persevering with this for a year, I think that the serigraph turned out really very well. If you don't recognize this scene, it doesn't exist anymore because this is where the convention center now is. So all these really wonderful textured buildings were knocked down. In fact, in the adjacent areas around Filbert Street, there were wonderful bits of subject matter throughout this whole neighborhood back in the late 70s and early 80s. There were just so many things, and it was just a constant source of inspiration. I like that gritty kind of texture that's going on, and I was completely drawn to this scene when I came upon it.
So what's the process for making a seriograph?
Well, in this case here, we were experimenting for very early on with using water-based inks, but thinning them down so that you would be applying them in a way that's not unlike watercolor, where you're layering it. And so one of the things you would see in this piece is perhaps 7 or 8 different reds, whereas we really only used 3. But because we would put them on at different times and layer other colors on top and other screens on top, we were able to work out a lot of different hues of red by just using the 3 inks. And that was one of the things that took so long. We would be doing something and then realize, okay, we've gone down a blind alley. We've got to take this screen that we're using at number 20 and we've got to make it number 15. And so once the other thing that happened was I had hoped to stop at 35 screens, but we had to put in a couple extra screens to get the work to look the way that we wanted it to be.
Thank you. So I had a question for all 3 artists about your surfaces. So they range like from pretty lush and Tracy's to James. Yours is pretty modest, and Elizabeth, yours is somewhat in between. So if you could each speak about that, maybe Tracy could start with you, like your paint handling. And
Sure. So what I find, and this is probably true for all of us, is that everything interacts with everything. So the paint interacts with the surface, and the tools interact with the paint. So it all, I try to work with the same surfaces because I like to get to know what I can do and what I can't do. So but in this case, again, like, so these are on paper, and it's paper that I've treated with acrylic medium. So what was really fun was just exploring the different way, that the paper accepts the paint and how I can push the paint around, a little bit in a different way. So I'm someone who, I tend not to put the paint down and leave it. I tend to put it down and move it all around and scrape it off and, paint in layers. So it's part of what I love about painting, and it's sort of helps me get at like what I'm trying to say. So the materials and the marks, especially the marks, like they're not random. There's nothing sort of random or arbitrary. Like every mark is a decision. Every line or scraping is me trying to get at something, through the paint, if that makes sense. So first comes the thought, oh, I want to join this together, or maybe I want to delineate the drawing here. And then it becomes a question of, well, what tool do I have here that I can best, that will best help me accomplish that? So it's really interactive. And like I said, the surfaces have a really, a big impact on how the paint handles. So I typically paint on, again, these are paper, but I also paint on linen, typically oil primed linen. That's pretty much my favorite.
thank you.
Sure.
So Liz, can you comment on that?
I just wondered if you use medium, like if you use linseed oil. I love the transparencies that you're getting.
Thank you. I do sometimes use linseed oil. Occasionally I use liquid, and very often I don't use any medium. So I really couldn't say for sure with these, but and I think again that speaks to sort of how the surface and the paint interact. Because if the surface is taking the paint well, then I don't need the medium. So, and the transparencies, that does come from the medium, but that I do layer even when I'm working and finishing something all in one sitting. I do tend to layer. So I think some of the transparency comes from that. And again, like sort of the pushing and pulling and scraping. Those are the technical terms.
So Liz, your paintings, your hand is evident, but it's not overt. Is that something you strive for, or what are your thoughts about that? Oh, you're muted.
Thank you for asking. Like most of the time when I'm painting, I'm just feeling like, am I ever going to get this beauty that I'm seeing to stay still for me? You know, my eyes jump around a lot, so I have to keep re-deciding the exact focal point or line. I really love oil paint, partly because when you have a dry area and you come back the next day and you add another layer, it becomes like jewel-like. You can sort of see through it. And if it's in the same place, it works wonderfully. However, drawing being what it is, often you have to move things. I think I'd like to become more bold, and I'd also like to become more subtle with my color, like Constable. But I am proud of this painting. It was a pandemic painting. So like I did it out the window of the bathroom when we weren't going out. But to answer your question, I don't really think about texture, but I do find when a painting is nearing being done, some of the paint starts being thicker, and I like that. You know, so you have to be really careful that you don't overwhelm it with like little white lines and things like that. This is all different now. The tree was cut down. Many things changed. I watch it change as I go by, and it was really grand, you know, when I first saw it. And I love that sort of sweep of space, you know, that's what I'm trying to get a hold of. And measuring is the way to do that, in my opinion. And so you're always trying to figure out, like, why does this affect you? It's because one thing is big and one thing is smaller. And then to modulate that in a really careful but emotional way, that's very difficult, you know, for me. And so that's what I'm searching for.
That term that you used, emotional geometry, you know, I don't think I've heard that before, but it really resonates with me because you know, I do a lot of drawing and I do a lot of structural designing, I suppose. And my thought is that it's not in place of the feeling, it's to support the feeling. And I think you just said it in a way that I never, you know, that summarizes that very well.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. It supports emotion. But like James was saying about using geometry to not figure out, but lay out the painting, the first one, James, that you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking while you said that, like, in order to do that, you must be very, very knowledgeable about perspective and not be guessing, you know, but actually knowing.
Well, the thing is with linear perspective, it's really just once you understand the basics, then you can be off to the races. And there are a series of basics that can inform how you do this. And then it takes all the guesswork out. Basically, you know that the horizon line is going to occur at your own eye level. And most things are going to vanish at points at your eye level. There are exceptions. If you're looking up or down a hill, that's going to be an exception. But with something like this, I can just start to calculate how I want this to be, and then make adjustments to the shape of the buildings or what have you. In this case here, the diner was the primary thing, and I wanted to be faithful to that. But the other buildings, whatever adjustments needed to be made for the sake of the painting, then they were being made. The other thing that I had found is that in my cityscapes, drawing these modern cars is much more difficult than the old 3-box cars that we had 20 or 30 years ago. The drawing of these things and getting them to look like, you know, a Toyota or whatever the brand happens to be. That's something that I try and do, so that there's a certain illusion about the believability of the paintings. But I too am very much involved with the paint surface. That's something that I think about a lot, and I incorporate that. And when I'm making my marks, I'm thinking about marks that are purposeful and elegant as I can make them. In fact, that's what I typically tell my students to strive for. But the good news is that we all get to make a decision about what is purposeful and elegant. So that's, I think, why you have all these different looks to the work. This is another painting in New York City, the Comfort Diner. It's on 45th between 2nd and 3rd. And it's just a place that my wife and I have gone a lot. And we've spoken to the owners, and I told them, look, when the scaffolding comes down from this thing, I'm doing a painting of it. And when I get back to New York, I'm going to just send them a picture of it so that they can, you know, put it in the restaurant if they want. But one of the things that I'm trying to also do is when I want you to get a sense of that there's neon that's on, that there's metal, that there's stone. All these different surfaces are things that I want to be very much involved with depicting. So the more that you can understand the nature of the pigments, and remember that the pigments remain the same regardless of medium. So if you've been working with a cadmium red or yellow ochre in any medium, it's the same it's only the vehicle that changes. So the other thing with watercolor, just to maintain control, is that water is both part of the vehicle and it is the solvent. So water control is really very, very important. And so the more you can understand how the pigments operate, the easier it's going to be to get predictable results. And so you may have a hue, a blue hue, we'll say, and there'll be 3 or 4 paints that will have that same hue. But because of the other cofactors that are involved with the nature of the pigments, maybe there is going to be one selection that is, because it's maybe more transparent or the pigment particles are smaller, or whatever it happens to be, that is going to be a better choice under the circumstances you find.
So James, there's a question about your serigraph.
Okay.
Was it more difficult and or time consuming than making the painting itself?
Well, the painting itself, my paintings are time consuming. So I had a show at the Woodmere, and when the director at the time wrote about it, he said, Toogood talks about his paintings being time consuming. They're labor intensive and time consuming. And so both projects really took an awful lot of time. I used to, well, I still do. I think about the paintings in terms of, you know, how many hours, generally speaking. And at the time, I don't do this now, but when I was a younger person, I would work 80 hours a week all the time, sometimes even 100. But when you put in that many hours, it's good because you can satisfy the gallery needs, but you can also blow out your arm. And that's actually something that I have had some shoulder damage because of all the work that I've done. So I restrict my my time painting to at most 8 hours a day. and sometimes a little bit less than that, depending on how I'm feeling. So yeah, both projects were very labor intensive, I would say. The painting probably took about 200 hours, and the serigraph was over the course of a year.
And you're also teaching a workshop with us on the 20th,
Yes.
next Saturday. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So the workshop is open to all levels. People who have an idea about something they might want to work on with me and bring their own source material may do that. Then what I'm also going to do is make sure that I'm going to do a demonstration, and then for people who just want to begin, they can paint along with me with a reference of this same thing that I'm going to be using for the demonstration. And the demonstration is set up so that we can talk about what are some of the basic ideas that are involved in making a complete watercolor. Nothing as detailed as you're looking at right now, but you'll be able to get a sense of atmospheric perspective and linear perspective, a sense of design, color, value, all those things. And then hopefully at the end of the day, you'll have a completed piece that you can take home with you. And then, like I said, it's open to other people who may want to just drill down with me on something that they want to work on.
Thank you. There's a question for all three of you asking if you do any pure landscapes.
Pure landscapes, I'm not sure what that
I guess non-city scenes.
Oh, yes. Some of my subject matter, I've been painting on the island of Bermuda for many, many years. And so I've spent altogether about 3 years in Bermuda when you add up all the time that I've spent there. And have been represented by galleries in Bermuda. I've worked with one of the museums, actually a couple of the museums, but one in particular. And so, yes, I do a lot of landscapes with the inspiration of Bermuda. You've got the coral limestone, the sun, sand, all of that is inspiring to me. And because I've spent so much time there, I've painted a significant amount of, I lost count of how many paintings I've done of Bermuda. But so, yes. And for a while before the pandemic, we were doing a plein air workshop that I hope we will be able to resume with PAFA, and people would come from anywhere. We 1 year, most of the people who came to the workshop, and it was about a week, were from California. I don't know. But so, yeah, I've been doing a lot of things like that for many, many years. And that's why I have the French easel that I can take with me on the trip.
But Tracy, Liz, how about you?
Yes, I do. Sure. I somebody once told me that people tend to make something out of nothing or nothing out of something. No, that's not right. But anyway, something like that. The idea, like, I'm always looking, I'm always looking around me, whether or not there's an obvious quote subject, and looking for shapes and patterns and connections. So I often find that in trees and leaves and things like that. So yeah, I do paint just straight landscapes without buildings or any other sort of man-made objects.
Thank you. Liz?
Thank you for asking. I have in the past, however, I am very inspired by man-made objects in the natural landscape. So, this thing to me has like a human feeling. I call it the sister, like the sisters march across the land and they they're so beautiful, you know, with figuring out like what has light on it and what doesn't. And then, you know, that to me is more intricate when you have some man-made objects. So, but I'm going to a residency in August and I'm hoping that I can find new subject matter there, and perhaps it will be only, you know, the land. And I might really enjoy that.
Yeah, I think the, gosh, I don't know why I'm trying to quote anything because it's not coming to me. But I think of it as there are people who are subject-based painters and maybe people who are design-based painters. So if I had to be one or the other, I would probably be a design-focused painter, meaning, you know, whether or not there's an obvious, again, like a thing is not what I'm painting per se. But I do really enjoy the intersection, like the organic versus man-made. I think when those two things come together, it's pretty fascinating.
So I'd like to know your thoughts on the show itself, because I don't know if you knew each other or knew of each other before the show. Like just how, I mean, when you put different types of work together, it sort of makes your own, makes you think about your own stuff a little different. So interested in, yeah, any thoughts about that?
I think it's,
did. Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I knew of James's work before, didn't know him personally, and Liz, I didn't know her work. So I think it's just a fantastic show, lots of different textures, and just sort of, I think each painting captures the personality of the place in a very different way.
Yeah, I had not met either, but I think that the final result is that each piece is playing off of the other. So I think that it makes it a more lively experience to have this kind of juxtaposition of styles and interests. So yeah, I think it works.
I had seen both of your work online, but never in person, and I was very happy to see it. It's moving to me how different everyone is and how well it goes together. I think it's a beautiful show.
And definitely to be seen in person for sure. Online is wonderful, but I enjoyed going up to each painting and just enjoying sort of the pathway through the painting, through all the textures, and I think that's definitely better enjoyed in person.
I agree with that completely. I've been stunned by paintings that I have seen online or in books, and then actually had a chance to confront them in person. It's a completely different experience. One of the things that with some of my paintings, one of the other things that my paintings are about is light and atmosphere. And like I was mentioning earlier, the paint quality, which isn't something that people often think of with watercolor, but there definitely is a certain paint quality that I'm trying to get to. And I mean, it sounds to me like all three of us are very invested in paint quality and what that's going to mean in our own work.
Are there any last questions for the artists from the audience? All right. If not, then we'll call it here. Thank you, artists, very much for tonight and the show. It's beautiful. And thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Great.
We hope you have a great night. All right.
Bye.
Oh.